the mammal that was eating a dinosaur. You have been told the same story your entire life. The Age of Dinosaurs was a world where mammals were small, terrified, and hiding in the dark, waiting 65 million years for their chance. They were survivors, not hunters, passengers, not players. That story is a lie, and we have the fossil to prove it. 130 million years ago, in what is now Liaoning province in northeastern China, a badger-sized animal died and sank into the fine volcanic ash of an ancient lake bed. It was preserved so perfectly that when paleontologist Yao Ming Hu and his colleagues described it in Nature in January of 2005, they could see not just its bones, but what was inside them. Inside its rib cage, still in rough anatomical order, were the fragmented bones of a juvenile Psittacosaurus. A dinosaur, not scraps from a carcass scattered across a forest floor, not bones swallowed accidentally alongside a mouthful of insects. The hind limb elements, digits, and teeth were still connected, still sequenced, meaning this mammal had bitten off and swallowed chunks of an animal it had actively killed. The prey's bones were larger than the predator's own skull. The animal was Repenomamus robustus. It measured approximately 47 centimeters in length and weighed roughly the size of a Virginia opossum. In the same paper, Hu's team described a second species, Repenomamus giganticus, reaching up to 1 meter in length and weighing an estimated 12 to 14 kilograms, making it the largest known Mesozoic mammal at the time of publication. The Yixian Formation deposits where these specimens were recovered date to approximately 125 to 130 million years ago, confirmed by radiometric dating of the interbedded volcanic ash layers. The bite marks on the prey bones show deliberate shearing consistent with repeated chewing, not the frantic gulping of an opportunistic scavenger. This animal processed its meal, methodically, like a predator. The mainstream explanation is measured and reasonable. Paleontologists accept the find as genuine but frame it as exceptional. Opportunistic predation on a sick or injured juvenile, they say, a lucky strike. The dominant view is that large prey hunting was rare among Mesozoic mammals, not a standard behavioral strategy. Most animals of the period were primarily insectivores or omnivores, and Repenomamus was an outlier, not a representative of its time. That is the official position, and it is a defensible one. But the prey bones were not random. They were still organized, still connected, meaning something alive or very recently killed went into that stomach in deliberate pieces. Scavengers don't sort their food, and if Repenomamus giganticus reached a full meter in length, how many other Mesozoic mammals haven't been found yet? How many stomach contents were never preserved in fine enough sediment to survive? The fossils we have are the ones lucky enough to fall into the right lake on the right day. The behavior they document may have been happening across entire continents for millions of years without leaving a single trace we've recovered. Some researchers ask whether the Mesozoic mammal fauna was far more ecologically diverse and predatory than the textbooks suggest. If one badger-sized animal was actively hunting dinosaurs 130 million years ago, does that change the story of who was competing with whom during the supposed age of reptiles? Was the age of mammals not something that began 66 million years ago when the asteroid reset the board, but something that had already been running in the shadows, quietly, for tens of millions of years before that? We may never know how frequently Repenomamus hunted versus scavenged. We may never know how many other large Mesozoic mammal species shared this behavior. But we know what was in that stomach. We know it was articulated. We know it was a dinosaur. And we know that changes everything about the story we thought we were telling. From land to sea now, and from a predator that surprises us to a scene of predation so impossible it looks less like a fossil record and more like a scene from mythology. Because what was found inside a 78-million-year-old shark in the chalk beds of Kansas should not have been there at all. The flying reptile inside the sea monster. Picture the Western Interior Seaway. It is 78 million years ago, and this inland ocean cuts the North American continent in half, a warm, shallow body of water stretching 800 kilometers from east to west, covering everything that is now Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas. The sky above it is not empty. Pteranodon, a flying reptile with a wingspan of up to 6 meters, soars on thermals above the glittering surface, hunting fish from the air the way a modern albatross hunts today. But something is watching from below, and this story ends badly for the one with wings. The chalk beds of the Smoky Hill member of the Niobrara Formation in western Kansas are among the richest Cretaceous marine fossil sites on Earth. They have given paleontologists mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, giant fish, and sharks. But one specimen stands apart. It belongs to Critoxyrina mantelli, a shark reaching 6 to 7 meters in length, nicknamed the Ginsu shark for its serrated blade-like teeth capable of cutting through bone. When paleontologist Kenshu Shimada of DePaul University analyzed this specimen, published in the Journal of Paleontology in 1997, he identified what was inside its gut region: skeletal elements belonging to a pteranodon, wing bones, vertebrae, the unmistakable anatomy of a flying reptile preserved inside the stomach of a sea predator. Critoxyrina was no minor player in this ecosystem. The Smoky Hill chalk has produced at least 17 documented examples of this shark associated with prey remains, including mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and large bony fish, making it the best documented apex predator of its formation. Its serrated teeth were self-sharpening along both edges, capable of sawing through the bones of animals far larger than itself. Pteranodon, for its part, ranged widely in body size, with the smaller individuals weighing perhaps 2 kilograms and the largest reaching 9 kilograms, but all of them spent significant time skimming low over open water, plunging their beaks below the surface to seize fish. That behavior brought them into the killing range of what was below. The Western Interior Seaway had no safe airspace near the waterline. The standard scientific explanation is measured. Pterosaurs likely drowned, died of injury, or landed on the surface while feeding, and Critoxyrina encountered the carcass or a struggling animal at the waterline. Cross-habitat feeding events like this are statistically inevitable over millions of years. The positioning of the bones inside the gut is consistent with a fast, decisive consumption, which is what you would expect from a shark encountering prey at the surface. But if this were a casual scavenge of a floating carcass, why do the bone positions suggest rapid whole-body consumption rather than the scattered, diffuse feeding pattern of a shark working over a drifting corpse? Critoxyrina had the jaw architecture to bite clean through bone. It did not need to be patient. Some researchers ask whether large marine predators during the Cretaceous actively patrolled the waterline looking for low-flying pterosaurs, the same way modern great white sharks breach explosively to take seals near the surface. If so, then the boundary between sea and sky over the Western Interior Seaway was a killing zone, and the pteranodon fossils we find on the seafloor may not all represent animals that died in the air and drifted down. Some of them may have been pulled under. How common was this interaction? Did the threat from below influence the flight behavior of pteranodon over open water? Did it drive them to fly higher, stay further from the surface, develop faster wing beats over dangerous stretches of open sea? The fossil record cannot tell us because behavior doesn't fossilize, only the consequences do. And one consequence, frozen in 78-million-year-old chalk, is a flying reptile inside a shark. From the shallow inland sea of North America, we go to the ancient Tethys Ocean off the coast of what is now Morocco, where two of the most terrifying animals that ever lived in the sea came together in a way that no reconstruction ever quite prepared us for. The sea monster. Inside the sea monster. There is a specimen in the collections of the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County cataloged as LACM 128319. It is a mosasaur, a large marine reptile from the late Cretaceous recovered from the phosphate-rich Ould Abdoun Basin of Morocco. The phosphate beds of this region were once the floor of a warm, shallow extension of the Tethys Sea, and they preserve specimens with a fidelity that still startles paleontologists. Bone positions, body outlines, and occasionally the contents of the stomach. When preparators worked through the abdominal region of this specimen, they found bones that did not belong to the mosasaur. They belonged to a plesiosaur. The ocean's two most iconic dynasties of giant predatory reptiles locked into a single fossil, one inside the other. Mosasaurs were the dominant marine predators of the late Cretaceous, ranging in length from 3 meters to over 17 meters in the largest species. They were fast, aggressive, and ecologically flexible, consuming fish, turtles, sharks, ammonites, and apparently each other's relatives. The gut contents of LACM 128319 include plesiosaur limb bones and vertebrae, identifiable by their distinctive morphology, belonging to a juvenile long-necked form estimated at under 2 meters in total body length. The Ould Abdoun Basin preserves one of the world's richest late Cretaceous marine faunas, with multiple mosasaur species, plesiosaurs, giant sharks, and enormous bony fish all documented from the same formation. This was not a quiet sea. It was a layered, competitive, violent ecosystem, and at its apex, things ate other apex predators. Mosasaur bite force was extraordinary. Analyses of large mosasaurines calculate jaw force exceeding 13,000 newtons in some species, comparable to large saltwater crocodilians, more than sufficient to crush the relatively light bones of a juvenile plesiosaur. We also know, from a landmark 2013 paper by Caldwell and Nydam published in Paleontology, that mosasaurs were live-bearing, producing live young rather than laying eggs. That means the late Cretaceous ocean was populated by juvenile mosasaurs as well as juvenile plesiosaurs, and juveniles of both groups would have been vulnerable. The sea was, in a very literal sense, full of prey for something large enough and fast enough to take it. Paleontologists interpret this as straightforward predation or opportunistic feeding. A large mosasaur, an apex predator by any definition, consumed a juvenile plesiosaur that was injured, young, or simply within reach. Mosasaurs are well documented as generalist hunters. Adding a juvenile plesiosaur to that diet fits the model cleanly. This is considered a striking but not deeply mysterious find. But this raises a question that the standard interpretation doesn't fully engage with. If mosasaurs were actively preying on juvenile plesiosaurs, the two groups were not just coexisting as parallel apex predators, they were in a direct predator-prey relationship. Mosasaur predation pressure may have shaped the evolution of plesiosaur body size, behavior, and habitat use throughout the late Cretaceous. And some researchers ask a harder question. Was competition between these two dynasties a contributing factor to the ecological instability that made both of them vulnerable when the asteroid arrived 66 million years ago? We have one fossil showing us one meal. How many such meals happened over the course of millions of years, and what did that sustained predation do to the animals being eaten? The real question isn't who won. Both groups died at the end of the Cretaceous. The real question is how long the fight lasted and what it cost them both. The bones in that mosasaur's stomach are not just evidence of a single predation event. they may be a fragment of an arms race that ran for millions of years and left its mark on both sides of the food web. From the ancient Tethys Ocean, we surface and move to land, to the most famous predator in paleontological history, and to the evidence written directly into her bones that the most dangerous thing Tyrannosaurus rex ever faced was another Tyrannosaurus rex. The Tyrannosaurus that fought itself. She was the most complete Tyrannosaurus rex ever found. The most studied animal in the history of paleontology, 12.3 meters long, 4 meters tall at the hip, every tooth the size of a banana. Scientists have spent 30 years measuring, scanning, and analyzing every centimeter of her skeleton. They thought they knew everything about her. Then they looked at the damage more carefully, and they realized something had been trying to kill her long before the asteroid arrived. EF MNHPR 2081, known as Sue, was excavated by Peter Larson and the Black Hills Institute in August of 1990 on land belonging to the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota. After a landmark legal dispute, she was acquired by the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, where she remains today. And her skeleton is a record of violence, not from prey, not from the environment, from her own species. Pathological analysis of Sue's skeleton identifies healed puncture wounds on her left lower jaw and fibula, whose spacing and depth match the tooth geometry of a large tyrannosaur. The wounds healed, the bone remodeled. She survived a bite from something her own size and kept living. Her right fibula tells an even more dramatic story. A healed fracture so catastrophic it produced a massive bony callus, a fist-sized growth where the bone broke and knit itself back together. She walked on that leg. She hunted on that leg. A 2009 study by Bruce Rothschild and Lawrence Martin proposed that lesions in her jaw bones were consistent with trichomoniasis, a parasitic infection still documented in modern raptors, potentially transmitted through shared carcasses or direct physical contact. She may have carried a chronic infection alongside everything else. Her skeleton also records at least 2 confirmed rib fractures, multiple vertebral pathologies, and evidence of tendon avulsion injuries, places where muscle attachments tore away from bone under extreme stress. The mainstream interpretation is reasonable and well supported. Paleopathologists view Sue's injuries as the accumulated record of a long and difficult life. Territorial combat with other tyrannosaurs, failed prey strikes, falls, and disease are all consistent with what is observed in large predatory animals today. The healed nature of most wounds confirms she survived them, which is itself remarkable. Face biting between Tyrannosaurus individuals may have been dominance or mating behavior analogous to combat seen in modern Komodo dragons and crocodilians. But the sheer volume of injuries on a single animal is difficult to attribute to bad luck alone. Sue had a shattered leg, broken ribs, face wounds, jaw lesions, and vertebral damage, and she healed from all of it. And she is not unique. Surveys of Tyrannosaurus rex skulls found that a striking proportion show healed bite wounds consistent with intraspecific combat. If this is a pattern across the species, then the solitary asocial tyrannosaur of the textbooks is missing something important. Something organized was happening in those late Cretaceous floodplains, and the bones are the only record we have of it. Some researchers ask whether the frequency of conspecific bite wounds across tyrannosaur specimens implies a social structure far more complex than any model has formally accommodated. Dominance hierarchies, territorial disputes, mating competition involving sustained physical combat. If tyrannosaurs established and defended social hierarchies through face biting, then the wounds on Sue's skull are not just evidence of violence. Yeah, they are evidence of a social world 67 million years in the past, written in calcified scar tissue, waiting for someone to read it. We don't know if Sue was dominant or subordinate. We don't know if she fought for territory or for a mate or both. We only know she fought and that she won enough of those fights to keep walking. From the Badlands of South Dakota, we move to the Morrison Formation of the American West 150 million years ago, where a predator survived something that should have killed it and carried the proof inside its own skeleton for the rest of its life. The hunter impaled by its prey. Every schoolbook shows the same image. Allosaurus attacking Stegosaurus, the predator in complete control, the prey helpless and passive, a foregone conclusion written in 12 meters of theropod muscle and hunger. That image is a reconstruction, and we now know it is wrong, because one Allosaurus walked away from a hunt with a piece of Stegosaurus permanently embedded in its hip. The prey fought back hard enough to punch a hole through the predator's pelvis. And then the predator survived. The Morrison Formation is one of the most fossil-rich geological layers on Earth, stretching across Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and the surrounding states, deposited roughly 150 million years ago during the late Jurassic. It preserves both animals in extraordinary detail. Allosaurus fragilis, the dominant predator of its ecosystem, reaching 8.5 to 12 meters in length and weighing an estimated 1,500 to 2,000 kilograms. Stegosaurus, the heavily armored herbivore with the distinctive row of plates along its back and, critically, 4 tail spikes, each averaging 60 to 90 centimeters in length, tapering to sharp points capable of delivering devastating strikes powered by the animal's substantial tail musculature. The specimen at the center of this story is an Allosaurus pubic bone housed at the Natural History Museum of London. It carries a penetrating wound whose circular cross-section and diameter precisely match the dimensions of a Stegosaurus tail spike recovered from the same formation. New bone growth fills the injury site. This Allosaurus healed. It continued living, presumably hunting, with a spike wound in its pelvis, a calcified reminder of the day a prey animal hit back with enough force to breach bone. Kenneth Carpenter's biomechanical analysis of Stegosaurus tail musculature, published in the Swiss Journal of Geosciences in 2010, confirmed the tail could deliver strikes with force sufficient to penetrate theropod bone. The thagomizer, the cluster of tail spikes, was not decorative. It was a weapon, and it worked. Paleontologists read this as straightforward evidence that Stegosaurus' defensive anatomy was functionally effective. The wound healed, suggesting both animals may have withdrawn from the encounter rather than fighting to the finish. Predator-prey combat injuries are well documented across the fossil record, considered a normal cost of active predation. This is not controversial within the field. But consider what it means for every Jurassic predation scene ever reconstructed. If Allosaurus, 1,500 kilograms of evolved killing machine, could be driven off by its prey and carry the scar for the rest of its life, then no hunt in the Jurassic was without mortal risk. Every Stegosaurus was potentially lethal, and the Morrison Formation is full of damaged Allosaurus bones. Additional specimens from the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry in Utah show bite marks on Allosaurus bones consistent with conspecific feeding, suggesting that injured or dead Allosaurus were sometimes consumed by members of their own species. The apex predator of the Jurassic was also, apparently, prey. Some researchers ask whether the visible toll of failed hunts on Allosaurus populations was high enough to exert real evolutionary pressure on the predator itself. If a significant proportion of hunts ended in injury, then the selection pressure to develop faster, safer, or more cooperative hunting strategies would have been intense. Did Allosaurus hunt in coordinated groups precisely because a solo attack on a healthy Stegosaurus was too dangerous? The evidence is not settled. But the hole in that hip bone argues for taking the question seriously. Stegosaurus didn't just survive Allosaurus, It shaped Allosaurus in the most direct way possible. From the Jurassic of North America, we travel to the late Cretaceous Seaway of Kansas, where the mystery isn't violence and it isn't predation. It is something stranger and more methodical. Hundreds of smooth stones found inside a sea monster, carried from places it had no business visiting, for reasons no one has fully explained in over a century of trying. The stones that shouldn't be there. You are excavating a long-necked plesiosaur from a chalk cliff in Kansas. The work is slow, the sun is brutal, and the bones are magnificent. You expose the rib cage, you work deeper into the abdominal region, and then you stop. Because there, where the stomach would have been, are stones, dozens of them, smooth, rounded, polished to a shine that only moving water produces. You pick one up and turn it in your hand. The rock type is wrong for Kansas. It's wrong for any marine environment. These stones came from a river or a beach hundreds of kilometers from where this animal died, and it brought them here deliberately. Gastroliths, stones found in the stomach regions of ancient animals, have been documented in elasmosaurid plesiosaurs since the late 19th century. The most extensively studied examples come from the Niobrara Chalk of Kansas, the same formation that preserves Cretoxorhina and Pteranodon. Elasmosaurids were the long-necked giants of the plesiosaur family, some reaching 14 meters in length, their necks alone accounting for half that span, armed not with crushing teeth but with slender, fish-trapping fangs. They swallowed their prey whole, which makes the stones even harder to explain. One well-documented specimen from the Niobrara Formation contained approximately 253 individual gastroliths with a combined mass approaching 30 kilograms. The stones were consistently smooth and water-worn, showing no evidence of acid etching from stomach chemistry, which would be expected if they were simply swallowed accidentally alongside prey. Petrological analysis of gastroliths from multiple Kansas specimens reveals rock types originating from the Rocky Mountain uplands, 800 to 1,200 kilometers from the marine environments where the animals died. These stones were not picked up locally. They were collected from specific geological sources and transported into an open ocean. Kenneth Carpenter and Frank O'Keefe published foundational analyses of plesiosaur gastroliths examining their mass, distribution, and origin, and O'Keefe and colleagues' 2009 analysis in paleontology evaluated three competing hypotheses without finding a single, fully satisfying answer. The three most widely discussed explanations are mechanical digestion, the stones acted like a bird's gizzard to grind up prey; buoyancy control, the weight counteracted the natural buoyancy of air-filled lungs; and microbiome regulation, the minerals in the stones supported gut chemistry. Most paleontologists acknowledge that no single explanation accounts for all the data. The behavior may have served multiple functions simultaneously. That is the mainstream position, and it is an honest one. But none of these explanations accounts for the deliberate travel to collect specific rock types. A ballast stone is a ballast stone. You don't need to swim 1,000 kilometers to find a particular kind of granite when the ocean floor is covered in material that would serve the same weight-bearing function. The specificity of the stones, the distances traveled to collect them, and the consistency of their polish across multiple specimens from different time periods suggest a behavior far more purposeful than a simple, digestive, or buoyancy tool. Some individuals contain no gastroliths at all. Others contain hundreds. If this were an anatomical necessity, why the variation? Some researchers ask whether plesiosaur gastrolith behavior implies navigational memory and purposeful migration of a kind we have not traditionally associated with Mesozoic marine reptiles. If these animals remembered specific coastal or riverine locations, returned to them periodically, and maintained stone collections over the course of their lives. It suggests a cognitive sophistication that rewrites what we think we know about reptilian intelligence 80 million years ago. They were not just hunting fish in a sea, they were carrying pieces of a landscape they had visited before back into the depths. We may never know why. The answer died with the last elasmosaurid. From the chalk seas of Kansas, we moved to the Sahara, 95 million years ago, where the largest carnivorous dinosaur that ever walked the earth turns out to have been something science spent a century completely misunderstanding, and the proof was written inside its bones. The river monster. That rewrote everything for 100 years. Scientists argued about Spinosaurus. Its bones were strange. Its sail was inexplicable. Its proportions didn't fit any ecological model anyone could build with confidence. Some said it was a fish eater. Some said it was a terrestrial giant that occasionally waded into water. Others said the original specimens, described by German paleontologist Ernst Stromer in 1915 from material found in Egypt, were too fragmentary to say anything definitive. The debate ran for decades. Then in 2020, a team led by Nizar Ibrahim of the University of Portsmouth published a paper in Nature that changed the conversation entirely. Not because of what they found in the bones, because of what they found inside them. Spinosaurus aegyptiacus. The numbers alone are staggering. Estimated at 14 to 15 meters in length, potentially weighing between 7 and 20 metric tons, depending on the reconstruction model, it was larger than Tyrannosaurus rex by at least 2 meters, the longest carnivorous dinosaur known to science. It lived 95 million years ago in what is now southeastern Morocco, in the Kem group, a formation that preserves not a desert but the remains of a vast river delta system at the edge of an ancient sea, one of the most dangerous ecosystems in Earth's history. The same rivers that Spinosaurus inhabited also contained Carcharodontosaurus, a predator rivaling T. Rex in raw killing power, enormous crocodilians measuring 10 meters in length, giant sawfish called Onchopristis stretching 7 to 8 meters, and lungfish the size of canoes. This was not a quiet neighborhood. The Ibrahim 2020 Nature paper analyzed 1,200 bone density measurements across multiple Spinosaurus specimens and confirmed something remarkable. The cortical bone of Spinosaurus was significantly denser than that of terrestrial dinosaurs. Dense bone reduces buoyancy. It is a ballasting adaptation seen today in aquatic mammals like hippos and manatees, animals that spend their lives in water and need to sink rather than float. The paper also documented nostrils positioned far back on the skull, short hind limbs adapted for paddling rather than fast running, and pressure-sensitive pits along the snout identical to those found in modern crocodilians, which use them to detect underwater vibrations from moving prey. And in the stomach region of the Kem specimens, paleontologists identified fish vertebrae, specifically from large predatory fish species native to the same river system, including relatives of the giant sawfish Onchopristis. 100 years after Stromer first described it, Spinosaurus finally had direct dietary evidence embedded in its own body. It was hunting fish in the river from inside the river. Isotopic analysis of Spinosaurus teeth published by Romain Amyot and colleagues in 2010 had already shown oxygen and carbon isotope ratios consistent with a predominantly aquatic lifestyle, matching the values seen in turtles and crocodilians rather than terrestrial predators. The neural spines forming the famous sail or hump were found to be structurally similar to those of the modern pygmy sperm whale, suggesting a possible back fat or aquatic structural adaptation rather than a simple thermoregulatory fin. The scientific consensus following Ibrahim's paper accepts Spinosaurus as a semi-aquatic apex predator. The fish bones in its gut confirm the dietary picture. That part is settled. but the degree of its aquatic adaptation remains actively debated. A 2022 analysis challenged Ibrahim's reconstruction, arguing the limb proportions were not optimized for deep-water swimming and suggesting Spinosaurus was more of a shoreline wader than an open-water swimmer. Some researchers ask a harder question. In a river system already dominated by enormous crocodilians equally adapted to aquatic ambush predation, how did Spinosaurus partition resources? Did these two groups divide the river between them? Did they compete directly? The fish vertebrae in its gut confirm what it ate. They do not tell us how it shared the water with everything else that was trying to eat the same thing. From the rivers of the Cretaceous Sahara, we descend much further back, 360 million years ago, to an ocean that covered what is now Ohio, where the apex predator of the Devonian seas left behind something even stranger than bones. The 360 million year old vomit. It is not a fossil of bones. There are no dramatic teeth, no graceful vertebrae, no triumphant mounted skeleton in a museum hall. What Mark Williams of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History identified in the Cleveland Shale member of the Ohio Formation is far stranger than any of that. It is a fossil of what the animal decided it didn't need. 360 million years ago, the most terrifying predator in the Devonian Ocean swallowed its prey whole, and then, in a behavior no one expected from a creature this ancient, expelled the indigestible parts in compressed, semi-digested boluses. The oldest vomit in the vertebrate fossil record. Frozen in shale, still sitting in museum drawers, Dunkleosteus torelli. The numbers are absurd, an estimated 8.8 to 9 meters in length. A skull over 1 meter long, weighing an estimated 400 kilograms, covered in armored bone plates that gave it the silhouette of a tank rather than a fish. It had no true teeth. Its jaws were formed from sharpened plates of bone that self-sharpened as they wore against each other, the upper and lower plates meeting like scissor blades. Philip Anderson and Mark Westneat's 2006 biomechanical analysis calculated that Dunkleosteus could open its jaws in 20 milliseconds and generate bite forces and suction pressures among the highest of any fish ever measured, with force at the blade tip estimated at over 7,400 newtons. It was the apex predator of the late Devonian Ocean, and it had no teeth. The regurgitalate deposits, which is the technical term for fossilized vomited stomach contents, were identified by Williams within and immediately surrounding Dunkleosteus specimens in the Cleveland Shale. They are compressed clusters of fish bones, scales, and vertebrae, including identifiable remains of Devonian fish species known to have shared the same formation. The bones show signs of partial digestion and crushing consistent with passing through a stomach, and are found in the concentrated cohesive arrangements characteristic of a bolus, not the scattered distribution of random bone accumulation. The Cleveland Shale has yielded over 70 individual Dunkleosteus specimens, giving Williams a large enough sample to analyze the deposit statistically and confirm their behavioral origin. Additional regurgitalate material has been documented from Devonian deposits in Morocco, suggesting this was a consistent feature of the species across its geographic range. The mainstream view is that Williams's interpretation is correct and that the owl pellet feeding strategy was a logical consequence of Dunkleosteus anatomy. With no true teeth to process prey, swallowing whole and expelling indigestibles was efficient and practical. The discovery is considered direct behavioral evidence rather than a genuine mystery, but it establishes Dunkleosteus as a more behaviorally sophisticated predator than the conventional reconstruction of Devonian life had allowed for. But if Dunkleosteus was capable of gastric discrimination, selectively retaining digestible material and expelling the rest, what else about its neurology and behavior have we underestimated? The standard image of Devonian ocean life is one of instinct-driven simplicity, primitive animals operating on reflex in a primitive world. The regurgitalite deposits suggest something more considered, and some researchers ask whether the clustering of these deposits in specific locations within the shale represents not random feeding events scattered across the seafloor, but repeated returns to productive hunting grounds. If the bone clusters represent accumulated meals over years or decades at specific sites, they may function as something extraordinary. The world's oldest identifiable predator kill sites, not just vomit. A 360 million year old behavioral record, a hunting diary written in expelled bone. From the Devonian seas of Ohio, we move forward in time to Alberta, Canada, 75 million years ago, where a tyrannosaur skull carries a record of something the textbooks have been reluctant to fully reckon with: organized, repeated, face-to-face violence between apex predators of the same species. The tyrannosaur that was bitten in the face. You have a tyrannosaur skull in front of you, 9 meters long, 3 tons. Every tooth the size of a ripe banana, serrated along both edges, rooted deep enough in the jaw to tear through bone. By any measure, this is one of the most dangerous animals that ever lived on land, and on its face, not from prey, not from a fall, not from disease, there are bite wounds that could only have come from the jaws of another tyrannosaur. This animal stood face to face with something its own size, and it survived. The specimen is a Daspletosaurus torosus from the Old Man Formation of Alberta, Canada, a formation dated to approximately 75 million years ago. Daspletosaurus was the apex land predator of its ecosystem, reaching 8 to 9 meters in length and weighing an estimated 2,000 to 2,500 kilograms. The Oldman Formation preserves a world dense with life: hadrosaurs in enormous herds, ceratopsians in family groups, and multiple tyrannosaur species living in close proximity to one another. Research conducted at the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Drumheller, Alberta, examined the pathological injuries on the Daspletosaurus skull in detail, matching the size, spacing, and depth of the healed wounds against the dental records of contemporaneous tyrannosaur species. The match was clear. These were not herbivore bite marks. These were not scavenger gnaw marks. These were the marks of a large tyrannosaur that struck this animal across the face with enough force to penetrate bone and leave it permanently scarred. The wounds are concentrated on the left side of the skull, a pattern consistent with a head-on confrontation rather than an attack from the flank or rear, suggesting the two animals met face-to-face and fought. Bone remodeling at multiple injury sites confirms the Daspletosaurus lived for at least several months after sustaining the wounds, continuing to function as an active predator. Modern analogs for this behavior include Komodo dragons, which use facial biting as a primary mechanism in territorial disputes, and crocodilians, where jaw wrestling is a standard dominance interaction between adults. A broader survey of tyrannosaur specimens found that a striking proportion of examined skulls show healed bite wounds consistent with intraspecific combat, suggesting this was not an isolated incident in the history of one unlucky individual, but a recurring feature of tyrannosaur social life across multiple species and formations. The mainstream interpretation is that intraspecific combat in tyrannosaurs was dominance-related, consistent with behavior seen in large predatory reptiles today. Disputes over territory, mating rights, or carcass access escalated to physical confrontation. The high rate of healed rather than fatal wounds suggests these were typically ritualized escalations rather than fights to the death. But the frequency changes the meaning. If a large proportion of tyrannosaur skulls across multiple species bear the evidence of conspecific combat, than the solitary, asocial image of the tyrannosaur that has dominated paleontological reconstructions for decades is, at minimum, incomplete. Something organized was happening in those floodplain ecosystems. And some researchers ask whether the bite wound evidence implies not just individual territorial disputes, but structured social hierarchies, where position within a group was established and maintained through recurring physical contests. If tyrannosaurs had dominance hierarchies, then the face wounds on that Daspletosaurus skull are not just evidence of a fight, they are evidence of a social system. Of rank, of memory, of consequence, 75 million years ago, on a river delta in what is now Alberta. We cannot know what was at stake in that particular fight. We only know that both animals left it alive and that one of them carried the memory in its bones for the rest of its life. From Alberta, we arrive at the final item on this list, and it is the most unsettling of all, not because of what was found inside a prehistoric predator's stomach, but because of what was found inside its femur, and what that tissue, still flexible, still chemically identifiable, still containing recognizable biological information after 68 million years in the ground, implies about everything we thought we knew, the tissue that survived. 68 million years. Every scientist knows that soft tissue cannot survive 68 million years. Bone becomes mineralized, organic material degrades, DNA breaks down in fragments within tens of thousands of years under even the best preservation conditions. This is not a fringe position. It is a foundational principle of paleontology, confirmed by decades of geochemical research. Which is why what Mary Schweitzer found inside a Tyrannosaurus rex femur in 2005 should not exist, and why the scientific community spent years trying to explain it away. The specimen is MOR 1125, recovered from the Hell Creek Formation in eastern Montana by Jack Horner's team at the Museum of the Rockies. During the 2003 field season, the large femur had to be broken to fit into a transport helicopter. It was in that break, in the freshly exposed interior of a 68-million-year-old bone, that Schweitzer, then at North Carolina State University, saw something that stopped her. The material inside the bone was not fully mineralized. There were flexible, translucent structures, things that moved. Her landmark paper, published in Science on March 25, 2005, described soft tissue vessels and cellular preservation in Tyrannosaurus rex. Apparent blood vessel structures, round bodies resembling red blood cells, and fibrous material that behaved like collagen under chemical analysis. The implications cascaded immediately. John Asara of Harvard Medical School performed collagen peptide sequencing on material from the specimen, with results published in Science in 2007. The sequences most closely match collagen from chickens and ostriches, entirely consistent with the established evolutionary relationship between theropod dinosaurs and modern birds. It was the first time molecular data had been extracted from a non-avian dinosaur. In 2013, Schweitzer and colleagues published in Bone their proposed mechanism for the preservation. Iron-rich compounds derived from hemoglobin breakdown, acting as a chemical fixative that cross-linked organic molecules and slowed decomposition far beyond any previously modeled timescale. Subsequent work recovered apparent collagen fragments from a Brachylophosaurus specimen 80 million years old, and from a Triceratops specimen from the same Hell Creek Formation, suggesting this phenomenon may be more widespread than the single famous case implied. MOR 1125 also contained something else: medullary bone, a spongy tissue layer found inside the femur produced exclusively by female birds during egg laying, when they need a rapid calcium source for eggshell production. Its presence in this specimen provided the first direct evidence of a sexually mature female Tyrannosaurus rex, confirming for the first time that the species was sexually dimorphic, and that the reproductive physiology of modern birds was already fully in place 68 million years ago. The mainstream position is nuanced and carefully stated. Most paleontologists accept that some form of degraded original organic material, most likely heavily fragmented collagen, may survive in exceptionally preserved specimens under specific chemical conditions. The iron fixation hypothesis is considered plausible, but the scientific community emphasizes that the material is severely degraded and that claims of recoverable DNA from these specimens have not been substantiated and should not be extrapolated from what Schweitzer's team actually found, but the peptide sequences matched, not ambiguously. With statistical significance, they matched the living relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex, and the medullary bone is not a matter of interpretation. It is a specific, identifiable tissue type with a precisely known biological function. Something biological, something that was once alive inside this animal, survived 68 million years of burial, pressure, and chemical change. Some researchers ask whether this finding points to a preservation phenomenon far more common than the standard model of fossilization allows for. If iron fixation can preserve collagen under the right conditions, then the fossil record is not only a record of shapes and sizes, it may be a library of biochemistry that we have barely begun to read, because until 2005, no one thought to look. The past is not as finished as we assumed. The bones are still talking. 10 items, 10 different animals, 10 moments scattered across 360 million years of Earth history. And when you lay them next to each other, a pattern emerges that the standard story of prehistoric life never quite captures. The standard model is clean. Predators hunted prey. The strong survived. The weak became fossils. Evolution proceeded along its slow, impartial track. But everything on this list complicates that picture in the same direction. A mammal was hunting dinosaurs 130 million years ago. A shark pulled a flying reptile from the sky. The largest carnivorous dinosaur on land was a river predator whose bones were denser than those of any terrestrial dinosaur ever found. The most complete T. rex ever excavated was covered in the wounds of her own species, and inside a 68 million year old femur, a tissue type that should not exist, was still identifiable under a microscope. The mainstream view of all these finds is reasonable and should be stated fairly. Opportunistic predation, exceptional preservation, ecological flexibility, intraspecific competition analogous to behavior in modern animals. These are not dismissals. They are legitimate scientific frameworks, and they account for much of the evidence. Science earns its credibility precisely by demanding that extraordinary claims be matched with extraordinary proof. But taken together, these finds argue for something the textbooks have been slow to fully absorb: that the prehistoric world was more cognitively rich, more behaviorally complex, and more biologically strange than any single reconstruction has yet managed to capture. These animals were not simple. They carried stones for reasons we still cannot fully explain. They fought each other with enough force to leave permanent scars. They survived impalement by their own prey. They harbored tissues whose chemistry we can still partially read. The fossil record is not a collection of objects. It is a collection of arguments, and every one of these 10 fossils is arguing the same thing. We have underestimated what came before us. Most people walk through a natural history museum, look at the mounted skeletons behind the glass, read the placard, and accept it. They see static objects, organized by era, labeled by Latin name. They move on. But the fact that you made it here means you read the placard and then asked what it didn't say. This channel exists for people who do that. Hit subscribe and go to the comments. Pick the one item from this list that you think is hardest to explain away. Make your case. The rest of us are listening. 360 million years ago, an armored fish swallowed its prey and expelled the bones in a compressed bolus that fossilized in the shale and waited for someone to find it. 68 million years ago, a tyrannosaur died in a Montana floodplain, and something inside her femur held on longer than any biochemistry textbook said it could. The lesson running through all of it is the same one. The past does not end when the animal dies. It leaves evidence, it leaves marks, it waits. And every time we look more carefully at what is inside these ancient predators, we find that the prehistoric world is not behind us. It is still here, patient, chemical, and not yet finished with its testimony.